The Lost Continent, tracing Atlantis through ancient maps and memory. Opening, a question whispered across time. Close your eyes now and let yourself drift backward through the centuries. Imagine you are standing in a quiet library in Alexandria, Egypt, nearly 2,000 years ago. The Mediterranean sun filters through high windows, casting long shadows across scrolls of papyrus. A scholar bends over an ancient text, his finger tracing words written by Plato himself, words that describe an island civilization so magnificent, so powerful, that its very existence challenges everything we think we know about the ancient world. This is where our journey begins tonight. A journey not just through history, but through the fascinating intersection of legend, geography, and human longing. We're going to explore one of humanity's most enduring mysteries, the lost continent of Atlantis. But we won't simply ask whether it was real. Instead, we'll follow the traces it left behind, or seemed to leave behind, on the maps drawn by cartographers across the ages, on the shores of distant islands, and in the collective memory of civilizations separated by vast oceans. Let your breathing slow as we embark on this gentle exploration. There's no need to remember every detail. Just let the story wash over you like waves on an ancient shore, carrying you toward peaceful sleep. Part 1. Plato's Dream. Our story truly begins in Athens, around 360 BCE. The philosopher Plato, already elderly, sits in the academy he founded decades earlier. The olive trees rustle outside, and students gather to hear him speak. But today, Plato isn't discussing the nature of justice or the immortality of the soul. Instead, he's telling a story within a story, actually about a place called Atlantis. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes how his ancestor Solon, one of Athens' great lawgivers, traveled to Egypt around 590 BCE. There, in the ancient city of Sais, Egyptian priests shared with Solon a remarkable tale. They spoke of a great island nation that existed 9,000 years before their time, a civilization so advanced, so wealthy, that it dominated the Mediterranean and threatened to conquer all the lands around it. Picture this island now, as Plato described it. Let your mind create its contours as you might imagine clouds forming shapes in the sky. Atlantis was larger than Libya and Asia combined, the priest said. It lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar in the Atlantic Ocean. The island was a marvel of engineering and natural beauty, arranged in concentric circles of land and water, like a target painted by the gods themselves. At its center stood a hill, and on that hill, a magnificent temple dedicated to Poseidon, god of the sea. The temple's exterior was covered in silver, and its pinnacles were covered in gold. Inside stood a massive statue of Poseidon driving 6 winged horses, so tall it nearly touched the ceiling. Around the temple complex, walls were built of red, white, and black stone, quarried from the island itself, and these walls were covered with precious metals that gleamed in the Mediterranean sunday. The Atlanteans, Plato tells us, were descended from Poseidon himself, who fell in love with a mortal woman named Cleito. He carved out the central hill where she lived, surrounding it with rings of water and land to protect her. Their descendants became the kings of Atlantis, ruling over a civilization of extraordinary sophistication. Let these images settle into your mind gently, like sediment drifting to the ocean floor. There's no need to grasp at them. Just let them exist. The Atlanteans engineered their island into a paradise. They built bridges across the rings of water and tunnels through the rings of land, large enough for ships to pass from the outer sea to the inner harbor. They constructed a great canal, 50 stadia long, connecting the outermost ring to the sea. Fresh water springs, both hot and cold, bubbled up from the earth, feeding bathhouses and gardens. They planted trees and built gymnasiums, racecourses for horses, and military training grounds. Beyond the capital city, the island was divided into 10 kingdoms, one for each of Poseidon's sons. The land was rich and fertile, producing abundant crops. Mountains surrounded the city to the north, shielding it from cold winds, while the southern plain was among the most beautiful and fertile in the world, stretching 3,000 stadia in one direction and 2,000 inches the other. But Atlantis was not merely wealthy and beautiful. It was powerful. The Atlantean kings commanded a formidable military force. 10,000 chariots, 1,200 ships, and countless foot soldiers. They had conquered many of the islands around them, and had even gained a foothold in Europe and Africa, controlling territory as far as Egypt and Tuscany. And here is where Plato's account takes its crucial turn, the reason this story is echoed through the millennia. The Atlanteans, Plato tells us, became corrupted by their wealth and power. The divine nature they inherited from Poseidon began to fade, becoming diluted too often and too much with the mortal admixture. Human nature took over. They grew ambitious, greedy, and aggressive. Zeus, looking down from Olympus, saw their decline and decided to punish them. He assembled the gods and spoke to them, and here, Plato's dialogue ends abruptly. The text of Critias breaks off mid-sentence, leaving Atlantis suspended between its glory and its doom. But we know what came next, because Plato tells us in Timaeus. The Atlanteans attempted to invade Athens and enslave its people. The Athenians, virtuous and brave, fought back and defeated the Atlantean army. But then, in a single terrible day and night, catastrophe struck. Earthquakes and floods of unprecedented violence shook the earth. The Athenian army was swallowed up by the ground, and the entire island of Atlantis sank beneath the waves, vanishing completely into the Atlantic Ocean. As you lie there now, breathing slowly, imagine that cataclysm. But not with fear, with the distant curiosity of someone watching storm clouds gather on a far horizon. The ground trembling, the sea rising, an entire civilization, with all its temples and palaces, its libraries and gardens, its people and animals and accumulated wisdom, sliding beneath the waves in mere hours, and then silence. Only the sea remaining, impassable and muddy with debris, too shallow for ships to cross but too deep for any trace of Atlantis to be seen. This is the story Plato told. And for more than 2,000 years, humanity has been unable to let it go. Part 2. The question that won't die. Now, you might wonder, as you drift towards sleep, why this particular story has endured when so many other tales from antiquity have faded away. Why has Atlantis captivated generation after generation, long after we've relegated other ancient myths to the realm of pure fiction? Let your mind rest on this question lightly, without grasping for answers. Part of the reason is simple. Plato himself. He was not a teller of fairy tales. He was one of the most rigorous thinkers in human history, a philosopher who demanded evidence and logical consistency. When he wrote about justice or knowledge or the nature of reality, he employed careful reasoning and structured arguments. Why then would he invent an elaborate fictional civilization and present it as historical fact? Plato insisted the story was true. In the opening of Timaeus, he has Critias, the dialogue's narrator, emphasize this point. Listen then, Socrates, to a tale which, though strange, is certainly true. The philosopher repeats this claim, stressing that the account came from Solon, who heard it from Egyptian priests who kept meticulous records stretching back thousands of years. This insistence on truth is curious. Plato was perfectly comfortable writing obvious allegories and myths. His famous allegory of the cave is clearly metaphorical. His myth of Ur, describing the afterlife, is presented explicitly as a story. But Atlantis, he insists, was real. Some scholars argue that Plato invented Atlantis as a philosophical device, an ideal civilization that could serve as a foil to his ideal state described in The Republic. In this reading, Atlantis represents what happens when even a perfect society becomes corrupted by human weakness. Its destruction serves as a moral lesson. No matter how great a civilization becomes, it will fall if it loses its virtue. This interpretation makes sense, but it doesn't explain why Plato would so emphatically claim the story was true, or why he would ground it in such specific details: the dimensions of the rings, the distances of the planes, the number of ships and soldiers. Why include all this geographical and technical information if the story is purely allegorical? Let this puzzle drift through your mind like a boat on a calm sea. Don't try to solve it, just observe it. Other ancient writers took Plato's account more literally. Aristotle, Plato's own student, reportedly dismissed the story, saying, "He who invented it also destroyed it," suggesting Atlantis was pure fiction. But Aristotle's exact words on the subject are lost, surviving only as references in later texts, so we can't be entirely certain of his position. Crantor, a philosopher who lived about a century after Plato, apparently believed the story. According to later sources, he even claimed that the Egyptian priests in Say still possessed the historical records that Solon had consulted, inscribed on pillars. Unfortunately, Crantor's own writings are also lost, so we have only second-hand reports of his beliefs. As centuries passed, the story of Atlantis drifted in and out of philosophical and historical discourse. Some writers accepted it, others dismissed it, but it never quite disappeared. There was something about it, the specificity of Plato's description, perhaps, or the tantalizing possibility that a great civilization could vanish completely that kept it alive in human imagination. And then, after the fall of Rome, something interesting happened. As Europe entered what we call the Middle Ages, knowledge of Plato's original texts became scarce in Western Christendom. Most of Plato's works were preserved only in the Islamic world and the Byzantine Empire. The specific dialogues describing Atlantis, Timaeus, and Critias were largely unknown in medieval Europe, but the idea of Atlantis persisted anyway, transmitted through fragmentary references in other texts, whispered across centuries like a half-remembered dream. Breathe slowly now. Feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort, like ancient sediments settling on the ocean floor. Part 3. The Age of Exploration and the Rebirth of Atlantis. When Plato's dialogues finally returned to Western Europe during the Renaissance, they arrived at a propitious moment. The world was expanding. Christopher Columbus had sailed west in 1492, reaching what he thought was Asia, but what was actually an entirely unknown continent. Magellan's expedition circumnavigated the globe between 1519 and 1522. Suddenly, the world was vastly larger and stranger than Europeans had imagined. And Atlantis? Atlantis began appearing on maps. Picture yourself now as a cartographer in the early 16th century. You work in a room filled with the smell of ink and parchment. Before you lies a blank sheet, and your task is to represent the entire known world. You have reports from explorers, fragments of ancient texts, and your own imagination to fill in the blanks. The Atlantic Ocean stretches before you, vast and mysterious. Somewhere out there, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, Plato said Atlantis once existed. Might it still be there? One of the earliest and most famous examples appears in a map created in 1665 by the German Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher. His Mundus Subterraneus included a map that claimed to show Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean, oriented with south at the top. The map shows a large island between Spain and America, roughly shaped like an elongated oval or rectangle, labeled Situs Insulae Atlantidis, the site of the island of Atlantis. Kircher's map is fascinating not because we believe it's accurate, but because it represents an attempt to reconcile ancient text with contemporary geography. Kircher was a serious scholar, perhaps the most learned man of his age, fluent in multiple languages, with interests spanning geology, medicine, music, and mathematics. He didn't simply invent Atlantis' location arbitrarily. He tried to reconstruct it based on Plato's description and his understanding of how the Earth's geography had changed over time. Let the image of that map form softly in your mind. An island that no longer exists, drawn as if it were solid fact. But Kircher was far from the only one drawing connections between Atlantis and the emerging knowledge of the world's geography. The discovery of the Americas raised tantalizing questions. Could the Americas themselves be remnants of Atlantis? Or could the indigenous peoples of the Americas be descendants of Atlantean refugees who survived the cataclysm? In 1553, the Spanish historian Francisco López de Gómara published his Historia General de las Indias, in which he argued that the Americas were in fact Atlantis. The logic seemed compelling to some. Plato had said Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean. The Americas lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean. Could they be one and the same? The theory faced obvious objections. Plato said Atlantis had sunk beneath the waves, but the Americas were quite evidently above water. Supporters of the theory suggested that perhaps only part of Atlantis had sunk, or that sunk was a metaphorical way of describing how the island had been lost to the old world's knowledge. Francis Bacon, the English philosopher and statesman, published The New Atlantis in 1627, a utopian novel set on an island called Bensalem in the Pacific Ocean. Though fictional, Bacon's work drew explicit connections to Plato's Atlantis, suggesting it as a real place that had existed in America before being destroyed by a great flood. Bacon's Bensalem was what Atlantis might have been: a perfect society built on reason and scientific advancement. As you rest, let yourself imagine these early modern thinkers sitting by candlelight, poring over ancient texts and new maps, trying to piece together the puzzle of human history. They saw the world expanding before them, and they wondered what else might be real. What other ancient stories might contain kernels of truth? The impulse was not entirely foolish. After all, Heinrich Schliemann would later discover Troy using Homer's Iliad as a guide, proving that at least some ancient myths were based on real places. Why not Atlantis? Part 4. Islands in the Mist. As centuries passed and cartography became more precise, Atlantis retreated from serious maps. But the human imagination kept finding new candidates for the lost continent, particularly among the scattered islands of the Atlantic Ocean. Let your mind wander now to the Azores, 9 volcanic islands floating in the mid-Atlantic, roughly 900 miles west of Portugal. The Portuguese discovered them uninhabited in the 15th century, a cluster of peaks rising from the ocean floor. Could these islands be the mountaintops of sunken Atlantis, the only part still above water? Proponents of this theory pointed to intriguing features. The Azores sit on the mid-Atlantic ridge, a massive underwater mountain range that runs down the center of the Atlantic Ocean. This ridge represents the place where tectonic plates pull apart, creating new seafloor, one of the most geologically active regions on Earth. Volcanic eruptions and earthquakes are common. Perhaps, some theorized, a larger landmass once existed here, connected to or including the Azores, before volcanic activity caused parts of it to sink. In 1898, a commercial telegraph cable being laid across the Atlantic broke near the Azores. When a ship went to retrieve and repair the cable from a depth of about 2 miles, the grappling hooks brought up unusual rock samples. A French geologist, Pierre Termier, examined these rocks and concluded they were volcanic glass that could only have formed above water, then cooled rapidly. He calculated that this meant the area had been above sea level relatively recently, perhaps within the last 15,000 years. Termeer's announcement in 1912 created a sensation. Here was scientific evidence. Some claimed that land had indeed existed in the Atlantic and then sunk. The timing even roughly matched if one interpreted Plato's chronology more loosely. Atlantis believers felt vindicated. Of course, subsequent geological analysis has shown that Termeer's interpretation was incorrect. The rocks didn't require the presence of dry land to form, and the Azores' emergence from the sea is far more ancient and gradual than any sudden sinking of Atlantis would require. But for a time, the theory seemed tantalizingly plausible. Breathe deeply. Feel the weight of your body against the surface beneath you. You're safe here, floating on the surface of the present moment while we explore these sunken possibilities. The Canary Islands, located off the northwest coast of Africa, attracted similar speculation. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 15th century, they found the islands inhabited by the Guanches, a people who seemed to have no memory of how they'd arrived on the islands. They had no boats capable of ocean voyaging, yet they were there, on islands far from any mainland. Their language was unique, their culture distinctive. Some theorists wondered, could the Guanches be descendants of Atlanteans, marooned on the mountain peaks of their civilization when the rest sank? We now know the Guanches were Berber peoples who arrived from North Africa, likely between 1000 BCE and 100 BCE, though exactly how they made the journey remains debated. But the romantic notion of them as Atlantean survivors persisted in popular imagination. Even more remote islands became candidates. The island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea, site of one of the most violent volcanic eruptions in human history around 1600 BCE, has been proposed as the real Atlantis. The eruption destroyed the Minoan settlement on the island and likely contributed to the decline of the Minoan civilization on nearby Crete. The similarities are striking. An advanced island civilization, a volcanic catastrophe, a sudden collapse. Could this be what Plato actually described, with the details changed or exaggerated over centuries of retelling? This theory has considerable support among scholars because it grounds Atlantis in a real, documented event. But it requires us to believe that Plato, or his sources, got almost every detail wrong. The location, Mediterranean instead of Atlantic. The size, small island instead of continent. The date, 1600 BCE instead of 9600 BCE. And the nature of the civilization, Minoan instead of Atlantean. It's possible. Oral traditions do distort over time, but it requires reinterpreting Plato's account so extensively that we might wonder whether we're still talking about Atlantis at all. Let these islands drift through your consciousness like clouds moving slowly across the sky. The Azores, the Canaries, Santorini, each one a possible answer to an ancient riddle, each one ultimately insufficient. Part 5. The Cartographer's Fingerprints. Now we come to one of the most intriguing aspects of the Atlantis mystery. The strange features that appear on ancient and medieval maps, features that some researchers believe might represent memories or traces of lands that no longer exist. Allow yourself to sink deeper into relaxation as we explore these enigmatic documents. The most famous of these is the Piri-Reis map, created in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri-Reis. This map, drawn on gazelle skin, shows the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and the northern coast of Antarctica. What makes it extraordinary is its apparent accuracy and the sources Piri-Reis claimed to have used, including maps from the time of Alexander the Great. The map's depiction of South America's coastline is remarkably accurate for its time, but what really captured attention was the southern portion of the map. Some researchers, most notably Charles Hapgood, in his 1966 book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, argued that the southern landmass represented Antarctica's coast as it would appear without ice, suggesting the map was based on sources that predated the last ice age, when Antarctica was ice-free. If true, This would be revolutionary. It would mean ancient civilizations possessed knowledge of Antarctica thousands of years before its official discovery in 1820. And if they knew about Antarctica, couldn't they have known about Atlantis too? Couldn't Atlantis itself have been the civilization that created these ancient source maps? Let yourself imagine the implications without judgment. Just observe the idea floating through your consciousness. Mainstream scholars have challenged this interpretation extensively. They note that the southern portion of Piri Reis's map probably depicts South America's coast continuing southward, not Antarctica at all. The shapes don't match Antarctica's actual coastline very closely. And even if they did, there's no evidence that Antarctica has been ice-free during the entire span of human civilization. The Antarctic ice sheet is millions of years old. But the Piri Reis map is not alone in inspiring speculation. The Orontes Phineas map of 1531 is another curious document. This map shows Antarctica roughly in its actual position and shape, though the continent would not be officially discovered for another 3 centuries. However, the shape shown doesn't match Antarctica's actual coastline under the ice very precisely, suggesting it might be based on speculation or misinterpreted data rather than ancient accurate sources. The Buache map of 1737, created by French geographer Philippe Buache, shows Antarctica as 2 separate landmasses divided by a strait or sea. Modern scientific analysis has confirmed that without its ice sheet, Antarctica might indeed appear as 2 landmasses. But this could be explained by Buache's use of deductive reasoning based on the sparse data available rather than access to ancient maps showing ice-free Antarctica. These maps are fascinating not because they prove anything about Atlantis, but because they show how knowledge, real or imagined, accumulates, distorts, and transmits across generations. Cartographers worked with incomplete information, copying from earlier maps, filling in blank spaces with educated guesses, wishful thinking, or images from classical texts. Breathe slowly, in and out, like waves on a distant shore. Some maps even labeled certain Atlantic islands as Atlantis or Antilia. These weren't claims that Atlantis had been found, but rather the cartographers' attempts to represent legendary islands from various sources. Antilia, also called the Island of 7 Cities, was a phantom island that supposedly appeared on nautical charts from the 15th century. It was said to have been settled by 7 Portuguese bishops fleeing the Moorish conquest of Iberia in the 8th century. These phantom islands are a reminder of how maps represented not just physical geography but also hope, fear, and legend. Sailors reported seeing islands that weren't there. Cartographers included islands they'd never verified. The line between real and imagined was permeable, especially in the poorly charted Atlantic. As you drift deeper into sleep, picture yourself looking at these old maps, drawn by hand, mixing fact and fantasy, trying to make sense of a world that seemed to grow larger and stranger with each passing decade. Part 6. The Evidence from Beneath. In more recent times, the search for Atlantis has turned to the ocean floor itself. If a continent sank, surely some trace must remain. Modern technology, sonar mapping, deep-sea submersibles, satellite imagery has given us the tools to search as never before. Let your breathing deepen as we descend into the ocean's depths. The Atlantic Ocean floor is not flat. Its landscape is varied as any on land, with mountain ranges, valleys, plateaus, and trenches. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which we mentioned earlier, is a massive underwater mountain range extending from the Arctic Ocean almost to Antarctica. It's here, some theorists believe, that evidence of Atlantis might be found. In the 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds, oceanographers discovered something remarkable: large, flat-topped underwater mountains called guyats or table mounts. These mountains rise thousands of feet from the ocean floor but stop well below the surface, their tops bizarrely flat, as if something had sliced them off. The explanation is that these were once volcanic islands that rose above sea level. Wave action eroded their peaks flat, creating islands with flat tops. Then, as the seafloor cooled and sank, these islands were carried down with it, becoming the submerged, flat-topped mountains we see today. This process is real and well documented, but could it explain Atlantis? Could a large Atlantic island have existed and then subsided beneath the waves? The problem is timing. This subsidence happens over millions of years, not overnight or even over centuries. There's no geological mechanism that could cause a continent-sized landmass in the Atlantic to sink rapidly enough to match Plato's account of Atlantis disappearing in a day and night. The Atlantic's tectonic plates are pulling apart, not colliding. This means new seafloor is being created, not destroyed. There's nowhere for a continent to sink to. The geology simply doesn't support it. Moreover, we've now mapped the Atlantic Ocean floor in considerable detail. There's no evidence of a sunken continent, no ruins, no streets, no temples beneath the waves, at least not where Atlantis is supposed to be. Let these facts settle gently in your mind, not with disappointment, but with the peaceful acceptance of what is. But there have been intriguing discoveries nonetheless. In 1967, a pilot flying over the Bahamas photographed what appeared to be a structure beneath the water near Bimini Island. When divers investigated, they found what some claimed was a road or wall made of large rectangular limestone blocks arranged in a linear pattern. The Bimini Road, as it came to be called, stretched for roughly half a mile. Could this be evidence of an ancient civilization? A remnant of Atlantis? Geologists who have examined the formation believe it's natural, a type of rock formation called beach rock that can fracture into regular, geometric patterns that appear almost artificial. Beach rock forms when calcium carbonate cement binds sand grains together in the intertidal zone, and it commonly fractures along natural lines, creating the illusion of masonry. Still, some researchers remain unconvinced by the natural explanation, pointing to features they believe are too regular, too precise to be natural. The debate continues in certain circles, though mainstream archaeology considers the case closed. Similar claims have been made about underwater structures found off the coasts of Cuba, Japan, the Yonaguni Monument, and India. In each case, conventional science has attributed the features to natural geological processes, while alternative researchers argue for artificial origin. In each case, the evidence remains ambiguous enough that true believers can maintain their faith, while skeptics remain skeptical. Perhaps that ambiguity is necessary. Perhaps we need mysteries that remain unsolved, frontiers that remain unexplored, possibilities that remain open. As you relax more deeply, imagine what lies beneath the ocean's surface. Not ancient civilizations necessarily, but the simple reality of the deep. Mountains taller than Everest, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, life forms strange beyond imagining, and layers of sediment preserving the story of our planet's past. The ocean keeps its secrets, regardless of what we believe. Part 7. Ancient Flood Memories. One of the most compelling aspects of the Atlantis story is how it fits into a broader pattern of flood myths found in cultures around the world. If we pull back from the specific question of Atlantis, we find something perhaps even more interesting: the possibility that ancient peoples were preserving memories of real catastrophic events. Let your mind wander through these ancient stories, carried like flotsam on the tide of human memory. The biblical story of Noah's Ark is the most famous flood narrative in Western culture, but it's far from unique. The ancient Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, written more than 4,000 years ago, contains a remarkably similar story. In it, the gods decide to destroy humanity with a flood. One righteous man, Utnapishtim, is warned by the god Ea and builds a great boat, taking aboard his family and representatives of all living creatures. The flood comes, covering the earth, killing all other humans. Eventually, the waters recede, and Utnapishtim's boat comes to rest on a mountain. The parallels to the Noah story are unmistakable, and scholars generally believe both derive from earlier Mesopotamian traditions about a great flood. But flood myths aren't limited to the Middle East. The ancient Greeks had several flood stories beyond Atlantis. In one, Zeus sends a flood to destroy the Bronze Age of humanity, and only Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survive by building an ark. When the flood subsides, they repopulate the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, which transform into people. In Hindu tradition, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu, who saves a small fish from being eaten. The fish, grateful, reveals itself to be Vishnu and warns Manu of a coming deluge. Manu builds a boat and survives the flood, eventually becoming the progenitor of humanity. Native American traditions contain flood stories too. The Ojibwe people tell of a great flood that covered the earth, with humanity surviving by clinging to a raft. The Haida people of the Pacific Northwest describe a flood that only subsided when people appealed to a supernatural killer whale. Even isolated cultures far from major river systems have flood myths. Australian Aboriginal stories speak of great floods. Pacific Island cultures preserve tales of islands sinking or waters rising. Andean peoples in South America, living high in the mountains, nonetheless have traditions of devastating floods. Breathe slowly and consider the implications. So many cultures, so widely separated, all preserving stories of catastrophic floods. Coincidence? Universal human fear of water? Or memories of real events? Modern geology offers some answers. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 11,000 to 12,000 years ago, enormous quantities of ice melted. Sea levels rose dramatically by about 400 feet globally. Coastlines where humans had been living for thousands of years were inundated. Islands disappeared. Entire landscapes were drowned. This wasn't a single 40-day flood, but a gradual process spanning thousands of years. Yet there were dramatic episodes within that larger rise. Ice dams holding back glacial lakes suddenly failed, releasing unimaginable volumes of water in catastrophic floods. One such event, the draining of Glacial Lake Agassiz in North America, may have released enough fresh water into the North Atlantic to temporarily disrupt ocean currents and trigger rapid climate changes. Imagine being a human community living on a coastline 12,000 years ago. You've been there for generations, perhaps centuries. The sea is constant, eternal, unchanging, or so it seems. But over the years, you notice the water creeping closer. The beach where you gathered shellfish is now underwater at high tide. The freshwater spring you relied on has been contaminated by salt. You move your settlement back, then back again. Stories are told of the old places, now beneath the waves. Or perhaps it happens faster. A storm surge combined with high tide and the rising baseline of the sea overwhelms your village in a single night. Homes are destroyed, lives lost. The survivors flee inland, carrying with them the story of how the sea suddenly rose and swallowed their world. Could such events be the kernel of truth behind flood myths? Could the memory of rising seas, passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years, have become the story of Noah, of Gilgamesh, of Deucalion, and of Atlantis? Some researchers think so. They suggest that Atlantis, if it was based on any real place, might have been a coastal civilization overcome by rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. The specific details, the concentric rings, the advanced technology, the war with Athens might be later elaborations, but the core memory might be of a real place lost to the waters. This doesn't match Plato's dating, which places Atlantis' destruction around 9,600 BCE right at the end of the Ice Age. But it's hard to imagine how accurate dating could be preserved through 9,000 years of oral tradition before being written down. Perhaps Plato's Egyptian priests did have genuine ancient traditions, but the details had become garbled over millennia of retelling. Let yourself float on these possibilities. You don't need to decide what's true. Just rest in the questions. Part 8. The Power of a Story. As you drift closer to sleep, consider why the story of Atlantis has endured. Why, among all the civilizations that have risen and fallen, all the cities that have been destroyed, does this one, which might never have existed at all, continue to captivate us? Part of the answer lies in what Atlantis represents: perfection, lost. Atlantis was not destroyed at birth. It was not conquered gradually or worn down slowly. It achieved greatness first, genuine, undeniable greatness. It became mighty, wealthy, advanced, and then, at the height of its power, it was destroyed in an instant. This is a profoundly resonant narrative. It speaks to our awareness that nothing lasts forever, that even our greatest achievements are temporary, that catastrophe can come without warning. But it also suggests that greatness is possible, that humans can build something magnificent, even if we cannot hold on to it forever. Breathe deeply. Let your muscles relax completely. Atlantis also represents lost knowledge. In the popular imagination, the Atlanteans possessed secrets we've forgotten, advanced technology, spiritual wisdom, scientific understanding that vanished with their civilization. This idea is especially appealing in ages of uncertainty, when people feel that modernity has lost something essential. If Atlantis was real and possessed such knowledge, maybe it can be recovered. Maybe we can learn from the past to solve the problems of the present. There's comfort in that notion, even if it's not true. It suggests that answers exist, that human beings have already solved problems we think are new. We're not alone in history, struggling with challenges no one has faced before. Others have been here, others have known, and perhaps their wisdom still exists somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered. The story of Atlantis also gives us permission to dream. It suggests the world is more mysterious than we think, that not everything has been discovered, mapped, and explained. In an age of satellite imagery and GPS coordinates, when it seems every corner of the Earth has been documented, Atlantis represents the possibility that secrets remain. That's a seductive thought. Let yourself dream now, gently, without effort. Let your thoughts become fluid and associative, the way they do at the edge of sleep. Throughout history, Atlantis has been many things to many people. To some, it's been proof of ancient wisdom. To others, a cautionary tale about hubris. Some have seen it as evidence of extraterrestrial contact or prehistoric advanced civilizations. Others have used it to support racist theories about master races or to claim legitimacy for pseudo-scientific ideas. The malleability of the Atlantis story, the way it can be reshaped to support almost any pre-existing belief, is a warning. It shows how a compelling narrative, especially one with just enough detail to seem real but not enough to be definitively verified or falsified, can become a kind of blank screen onto which people project their own desires, fears, and ideologies. This is why historians and archaeologists tend to be skeptical of Atlantis. Not because they lack imagination or want to suppress truth, but because they've seen how the story gets used, how it becomes a tool for avoiding the hard work of actual historical inquiry, the careful sifting of evidence, the intellectual humility required when sources are fragmentary and ambiguous. But perhaps the scholars are missing something too. Perhaps there's value in the story beyond its literal truth or falsehood. Stories shape us. They teach us what's possible, what's desirable, what's to be feared. They provide frameworks for thinking about our own civilizations, our own achievements and vulnerabilities. The story of Atlantis asks, what makes a civilization great? What leads to its downfall? How quickly can everything we've built vanish? These are not trivial questions. They are among the most important questions humans can ask. Rest now in these questions without seeking answers. Let them become softer, less urgent, as you sink deeper into peace. Part 9. Modern searches and modern dreams. In recent decades, the search for Atlantis has continued, driven by new technologies and new theories. Satellites scan the ocean floor. Underwater robots explore depths humans cannot reach. Computer models simulate ancient climates and sea levels. If Atlantis existed, surely we should be able to find it now. Your breathing is slow and regular now. Let yourself be carried along by the gentle current of this story, not holding on to any part of it. In the early 2000s, satellite imagery revealed unusual formations near the coast of Spain, in the wetlands where the Guadalquivir River meets the Atlantic. The features looked geometric, possibly artificial concentric circles within rectangles, covering many square miles. Could this be Atlantis? A team of researchers, including Richard Freund of the University of Hartford, investigated. They conducted ground surveys, examined core samples, and used electrical resistivity tomography to probe beneath the surface. In 2011, they announced their findings. The area had once been a coastal plain, and the unusual features might be the remains of a settlement destroyed by a tsunami. The media response was predictable. "Atlantis found," proclaimed headlines around the world, but the reality was more modest. The researchers had found evidence of an ancient settlement, yes, but linking it to Plato's Atlantis required considerable speculation. The location was wrong, Plato said, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, not just before them. The scale was wrong. The site was interesting but not continent-sized, and nothing about it suggested the advanced, powerful civilization Plato described. What they may have found was evidence of an ancient Iberian settlement destroyed by flooding, interesting in its own right, but not Atlantis. Other researchers have proposed locations ranging from Antarctica to Indonesia, from the North Sea to the Black Sea. In 2004, American architect Robert Sarmast claimed to have found Atlantis off the coast of Cyprus, basing his identification on underwater features he believed matched Plato's description. Subsequent investigation found no evidence of artificial structures. In 2013, Brazilian geographer Moacir Elias Santos argued that Atlantis was in Brazil, in the Pantanal region. In 2018, a researcher named Christos Jonas proposed that Atlantis was actually the island of Cyprus. Each new proposal is accompanied by arguments about how the evidence fits Plato's account, how previous interpretations were wrong, how the true Atlantis has finally been found. None of these identifications has gained widespread acceptance among scholars. Each requires reinterpreting Plato's text in creative ways, explaining away inconvenient details, or arguing that Plato was wrong about various specifics while being right about the existence of Atlantis itself. Let these theories drift away from you like boats disappearing over the horizon. They don't matter now. Nothing matters but rest. The pattern is always similar. Unusual geographical features are discovered through satellite imagery, sonar mapping, or local legends. These features are interpreted as potentially artificial or as matching some aspect of Plato's description. A theory is proposed linking the features to Atlantis. Initial excitement follows. Then closer examination reveals that the features are natural or are man-made but from a known culture, or simply don't match Plato's account closely enough to be convincing. And yet the search continues. Because as long as Atlantis remains undiscovered, it remains possible. And possibility, for some, is more appealing than certainty. Part 10. What we can learn. As you approach the threshold of sleep, let's consider what the search for Atlantis has taught us, whether or not the lost continent ever existed. First, it's taught us about our planet's dynamism. The Earth's surface is not fixed and eternal. Sea levels rise and fall. Islands emerge from volcanic activity and erode away. Coastlines migrate. Continents slowly drift across the face of the globe. The world our ancestors knew was different from ours, and the world our descendants will know will be different still. Archaeological sites are regularly discovered underwater, not remnants of Atlantis, but real ancient settlements flooded by rising seas. The Black Sea, once a freshwater lake, was catastrophically flooded when rising Mediterranean waters breached the Bosporus around 7,500 years ago, inundating settlements around its shores. Doggerland, a landmass that once connected Britain to continental Europe, was gradually submerged by rising seas between 8,000 and 6,500 years ago, erasing what may have been a populous region where humans had lived for thousands of years. These are real lost lands, even if they're not Atlantis. They remind us that the search for Atlantis, however quixotic, has prompted genuine scientific inquiry about past landscapes and vanished places. Your body is completely relaxed now. Your mind is quiet, receptive, open. Second, the Atlantis story has taught us about the nature of myth and memory. How do stories change as they're passed down? What kernel of truth, if any, might survive through generations of retelling? How do different cultures preserve historical knowledge in the absence of writing? These are questions relevant far beyond Atlantis. They apply to our understanding of oral traditions worldwide, from Aboriginal Australian songlines preserving geographical knowledge for tens of thousands of years to the historical basis of stories like the Iliad and the Odyssey. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Atlantis has taught us about ourselves. Our fascination with lost civilizations reveals our deep anxiety about impermanence. We build, we create, we accumulate, and somewhere in our minds, we know it's all temporary. Atlantis represents both our highest aspirations and our deepest fears. It also reveals our tendency toward pattern seeking, to find meaning in design even where none exists. The human brain is wired to recognize patterns, a valuable survival trait that helped our ancestors identify predators, find food, and navigate their environment. But this same trait can lead us to see faces in clouds, conspiracy and coincidence, and ancient civilizations in natural rock formations. The search for Atlantis reminds us to balance our openness to possibility with rigorous thinking, to dream while staying grounded in evidence, to wonder without abandoning reason. Let these thoughts dissolve now, like salt in water, becoming part of the ocean of your unconscious mind. Part 11. The Wisdom of Uncertainty. We've traveled far together tonight, through ancient Athens and medieval cartography, across real and imagined oceans, into the depths where continents might sleep. And where have we arrived? Perhaps where we began, with a story and a question. Was Atlantis real? The honest answer is that we don't know, and unless remarkable new evidence emerges, we probably never will. Plato's account is detailed enough to spark imagination, but not specific enough to enable verification. The geological evidence doesn't support a sunken continent in the Atlantic. The archaeological evidence doesn't point to any civilization that matches Plato's description. Yet the question itself has value. It reminds us that history is not a closed book, that our understanding of the past is incomplete and always subject to revision. It encourages us to look carefully at the world, to investigate possibilities, to remain curious. The search for Atlantis, even when unsuccessful, has led to genuine discoveries. Ancient settlements beneath the Mediterranean, evidence of catastrophic floods, improved understanding of how sea levels have changed, better techniques for underwater archaeology. Knowledge emerges even from pursuing chimeras, as long as we pursue them rigorously. Your breathing is so slow now, so peaceful. You're suspended between waking and sleeping, like an island in the mist. Perhaps the greatest wisdom is to hold uncertainty lightly, to say, I don't know, and that's okay. To be comfortable with mysteries that remain mysteries. To enjoy the story of Atlantis without needing to prove or disprove it, to let it inspire without letting it mislead. The ancient Greeks had a concept called aporia, a state of puzzlement, of productive confusion, where one realizes the limits of one's knowledge. Socrates, Plato's teacher, made this aporia his method, asking questions that revealed how little anyone truly understood. Perhaps Atlantis is Plato's gift of aporia to us, a question designed not to be answered but to make us think. In your drowsy state, you can appreciate the beauty of this. The unanswered question, the map with blank spaces, the ocean with depths unknown. These are not failures of knowledge, but invitations to wonder. Part 12. The Evening Sea. Imagine now that you're standing on a beach at twilight. The sun has just set, leaving the sky painted in deepening shades of blue. The ocean stretches before you, calm and darkening. Small waves wash up onto the sand with a rhythm like breathing. You're thinking about Atlantis, about all the places it might be, about whether it ever existed at all. But the thinking is gentle, abstract, more like watching thoughts drift by than actively pursuing them. The sand is cool beneath your feet. The air smells of salt and seaweed. In the distance, you can barely make out the horizon, that line where sea meets sky, where the known meets the unknown. You think about all the civilizations that have vanished. Not just Atlantis, but real places that thrived and then disappeared. The Indus Valley civilization, with its sophisticated cities and undeciphered writing. The ancient Pueblo peoples of the American Southwest, who built elaborate cliff dwellings and then abandoned them. The Norse settlement in Greenland, which endured for centuries before vanishing. The Roanoke colony, the lost colony of the Americas. All lost, all gone, but not forgotten, because their stories survived, and their ruins speak to us across the centuries. Maybe that's what Atlantis is, a symbol for all lost things, all vanished possibilities, all the versions of ourselves and our civilizations that existed once and exist no more. The waves continue their rhythm. In, out, like breathing, like a heartbeat. You're very tired now. You've traveled so far through time, across seas, into depths. It's time to rest. As you turn away from the ocean, you notice something in the sand, a shell half buried. You pick it up and brush away the sand. It's beautiful, spiraling, intricate, whole. You slip it into your pocket and start walking back, away from the shore. Behind you, the ocean keeps its secrets. Before you, the lights of home beckon. You're tired but content, having asked your questions of the sea and received the only answer that matters. Mystery, Part 13. Closing. Let your eyes close fully now, if they haven't already. Let your body sink completely into rest. The story of Atlantis, like all good stories, has no end. It will continue as long as humans wonder about the past, as long as we're capable of imagining civilizations greater than our own, as long as we can look at the ocean and wonder what lies beneath. Whether Atlantis was real or not matters less than what it represents. The possibility of greatness, the certainty of loss, the mystery of what came before us, and the question of what will remain after we're gone. Tonight, you've traced the possibility of Atlantis across ancient maps and through ancient minds. You've explored real islands and imagined continents. You've descended to the ocean floor and risen to the heights of philosophical speculation. And now, like an explorer returning home, you can rest. The world is full of mysteries. Some will be solved, others will remain forever tantalizing, forever just beyond reach. That's not a frustration, it's a gift. It means there will always be more to wonder about, more to explore, more to imagine. Let the story of Atlantis fade now, like a dream upon waking, or like wakefulness as you drift into dream. Let it become just a feeling, a mood, a gentle sense of possibility, and loss intermingled. Breathe deeply, slowly, somewhere beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Whether it's ancient ruins or simply ancient rocks, The earth keeps its counsel. The waves roll on, the tides rise and fall. The continents drift infinitesimally slowly, mountains rising in the deep and islands sinking beneath the surface, all according to rhythms too slow for human perception, too vast for human comprehension. You are small in this vast story, but you are part of it. Your wondering is part of the same impulse that drove Plato to write about Atlantis, that sent explorers across unknown seas, that sends archaeologists diving to the ocean floor. You are connected to all who have wondered, all who have searched, all who have stood at the edge of the known world and asked, what lies beyond? Rest now in that connection. Rest in the long chain of human curiosity that stretches from the ancient world to this present moment and will continue into a future we cannot see. Sleep comes like the tide, gradual and inevitable. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to solve any mysteries or answer any questions. You simply have to let go and let the darkness carry you. The lost continent sleeps beneath the waves, whether as reality or myth. And now, so do you. Good night.